presentation over. Welcome again, folks. Really glad you could join us, and I am turning it over to today's presenters. Please take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So now that you've heard a little bit about my weekend plans, right? It's nice to see you. I see a lot of familiar faces, so it's so nice to see you. And I see some new faces, which is always exciting too. Just to get us going, we've got a bunch of material that we're hoping to cover today. We are going to go somewhat quickly with the idea that the basics of this you know or have some familiarity with. Now, that said, at any point where we go too fast or something is not clear, 110% don't hesitate to let us know and ask questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat. Who's ever not presenting will be monitoring the chat. And then in terms of Millie and I, and then we'll also be intentionally pausing at sort of natural breaks to sort of see if there's any questions. And then we'll hold some time for questions as well. All of that said, I believe we're going till 12:30. Now that said, if you have very tailored or specific questions for you, or maybe you just need to process all the information first before you ask a question, Millie and I are happy to stay on a little bit later after the end of the formal part of this, or if you want to check in after the fact, we're more than happy to do that if there's something more program specific for you or your application. All right, so that's a little bit of housekeeping. Now you all have our slides to get going today. For those of you that have done this before, this is going to feel pretty similar, right? We're going to talk about what's new for this formula application, and then we're going to unpack each of those pieces with a specific focus on how to translate what you're already doing to what's in the new NOFO. Some of it's the same, some of it's new and a little bit different. All right, then we'll give you some resources and wrap it up. That said, there are some new faces, and so just to sort of help me out today, you know there's going to be some sort of round robin, right, before you all sort of go off into listen mode. But I was just wondering if you all could maybe come off mute or throw it up in the chat. If you could put in sort of your organization, and if there's something in particular from today that you would like to walk away with. Is there a particular question that you have about the program design component of the NOFO? Is there something in particular that you're trying to learn from today to help you with your application? So again, either come off mute and share it with the group or put it up in the chat, sharing your organization and if there's something specific you would like to get from today. Hello, Natasha from Boxwood. It's nice to see you. Hello, Pat. It's really nice to see you.
Hello, how are you?
Really good.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Glugler from Literacy, New Jersey, and happy Friday, everyone. I am filling in for Ali, who is on the beach on vacation today. So I'm excited to be here because we are first-time applicants. So I am super excited to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you. And hello, Norgillis from Greater Bergen. We spent some time with you yesterday. You must be tired of my voice at this point.
No, nothing like that.
You're kind. Hi, Del. Nice to see you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Daniela Chica. I'm the AmeriCorps Program Director at Montclair State University. So I'm sure we've bumped into each other at some point or another. But I think a key takeaway for me, I feel like I've heard this presentation a few times, but there are certain things that never seem to stick because I've never been too into data. I know this is your line of work and you guys really like this, but for some reason data and data collection and data analytics never sticks to me. So just getting a refresher of the information that I've learned in the past is always great.
Got it. Thank you for that. And I'm seeing in the chat, hello, Barbara, welcome. A link to access the new planning grant application in the chat. Lisa, do you happen to have that handy? Barbara's asking for a link for the new application.
I will be sending out an email momentarily to everyone. So you'll get that. I can't really drop it in the chat because it's eGrant. So then you have to go into eGrants and you have to open the application and all of that. But you'll have access to it by the time you're out of this session. Thank you.
And hello, Drew. Nice to see you. Refresh on performance measures. Gotcha. Hello, Marie. Nice to see you from Boxwood. Arlene is here, Center for Community Engagement. Nice to see you. And Emmanuel is here as well. It's nice to see you too. It's been a little bit.
I'll go as well. Hi, everybody. My name is Christina. I'm the program director at St. Paul's Community Development Corporation in Patterson. I always look forward to your presentation, so thank you again for everything you do for us. But I just am looking forward to making sure that we as a program that's been functioning for a few years now stay relevant and up to date with everything with a new application cycle. So I look forward to making sure I'm on top of everything for our agency.
Ah, that means, Christina, you noticed a certain sentence in that application. We're going to talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to talk about that. I got you. I was wondering if that was going to come up. And it did. Woohoo! Okay. Did we get everybody? Did I miss anyone? Okay. Then we're going to keep going. So that is super helpful. We are going to make sure that we cover all of that. And it sounds like, Millie, that maybe we can lean a little bit more heavily on performance measures, since it sounds like that's something we want to talk through. And then we wanted to do that so we can sort of tailor which pieces to dig into.
That's great.
I'll also highlight, I know we've got a couple new folks that are going to be submitting planning grants. So before we keep going, I'm going to warn you. Most of what we're going to dig into is going line by line for the operational grants. Here's what's in it for you as a planning grant, right? A, this is what you're going to be working toward, right? B, some of the components of what we're going to talk through are going to be related to what you'll have to put into your application for a planning grant, right? So things about the community need, or thinking about what sort of might be the big picture of the program activities that you're thinking about, and then the outcomes. The components that we'll talk about related to evidence and performance measures, this is a vision of what is to come, right? Like this could potentially be you next year. So just know we're going to move through those. These aren't necessarily things you will have to now translate and apply as you prepare your proposal. But know that at least the community problem section and thinking through those key details about the logic model and the program design, to the extent that you're ready and you have that, go for it. Otherwise, this is sort of, again, things that you'll start to be conceptualizing and specifying over the course of the planning grant, okay? If you have additional questions, always happy to address those as well. All right. So what's new? The key messages for today, what to take away is what's new. Now, for some of you, this is going to look very, very, very similar, right? This comes right from the NOFO. I believe it's page 28. And this is for the operational grant. The planning grants have a little bit of a different point structure. But what's interesting, and I wanted to point out, is the program design component of the application is 50% of your points. That's why we're here. And the actual community problem, evidence, and performance measures takes up 40 points. So you want to make sure you get that really solid and tight. Something that's unique to this application, this happened last year as well, but is a little bit different from the competitive application that happens in the fall, is that there are points provided to the performance measure section. So when you submit your application, you have your narrative section, and then you have, I believe it's at least 3 attachments, so separate documents that you'll complete in eGrants and upload. One of them is the actual logic model. The other one is a performance measure section. And I think the budget is a third section, and there might be some others as well. But the performance measures is the standalone section. The content of that section for this grant gets scored. So it's not just the performance measures that you integrate into the narrative, but it's also the quality of the information that you provide in that performance measure attachment gets scored. So wanted to highlight that here. All right, so things to know. If you have not written an application for an AmeriCorps program in the last year, but maybe you've done it in 3 years ago or 6 years ago, right? There are some changes to this NOFO that I wanted to highlight. The first one is related to the community problem, right? And the needs section. I know you all have your needs sections. You write them for different proposals and applications. You sort of beg, borrow, and steal different pieces of it, right? Something to know is that for this NOFO, there are 2 pieces that you need to focus on, in addition to what you know to be true about a needs section, right? You're going to have to talk about the role that current or historical inequities may play in contributing to the problem. So certainly a focus on disparities or inequities as it relates to your problem that you're describing. And 2, there is a requirement in the NOFO to integrate the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. This is a data source. I'm going to walk you through that in a couple minutes, but that is something that you'll want to integrate as a way of describing your community and the need. So those are 2 new things. The second new thing I want to highlight is related to the logic model. So if you've written this grant before, you might be surprised to see that there's no theory of change section. Well, that's because this is a little bit different. This NOFO, compared to past ones, this NOFO is really interested in understanding what are the things you need to make your program happen, your inputs, right? What are those activities that you're going to be doing? Primarily, at least in the program design section, this is about what your members will be doing, the services that they will be providing to the beneficiaries. Beneficiaries meaning those people receiving the member services. Are they students? Are they older adult residents in a community? Are they individuals who are currently in a homeless shelter, right? Like, who are those people receiving those services? And then what's going to happen? What are the outcomes, right? And there's some specifics about what needs to be included there, some of which you already know related to dosage and frequency, all those kinds of good things. But there's also some additional things in here about characteristics of the members that you might want to include. We'll walk you through that. But again, just to highlight, here we're really focusing and specifying what is happening as part of the program that the members are delivering to the community or the beneficiaries. Next thing, we've got evidence. You all know and love, I hope, this evidence section, right? And the evidence part of this application is broken up into evidence tier and evidence quality. And this is really designed to say, hey, this program that we're proposing to use funds for, someone else has done something like it or exactly the same thing, and they've been able to do the same, to achieve and accomplish the same outcomes that we're proposing here. Let me show you, right? This provides some justification for why you think doing what you're proposing to do will work. Work mean achieve your outcomes. Some key things, and I referenced this earlier with Christina, there's a really big update here. And the really big update is that, and I'm going to make sure I read it because I don't want to bungle my words, but if you have been funded for 6 consecutive years or more, it is the expectation that you will have preliminary or more rigorous evidence. So what that means is in the scale of pre-preliminary, preliminary, moderate, or strong, any grantee who's now applying and you have had 6 consecutive years of funding or more, it is expected that you're at the preliminary level. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means and what happens if you're not, right? So that's something to note. And then performance measures, again, this is that separate section. You'll integrate and mention some of this, obviously, in your logic model and your narrative. You'll include an performance measure pairing, which is an output and an outcome. Right? That's a minimum. And remember that these stand alone. And this is also where you start to describe how you're going to get those data, right? So Daniela, you mentioned this whole data piece just doesn't quite stick, right? This is the tricky part then, because this is where you outline your plan for how you're going to collect data that will ultimately enable you to report on your performance measures, okay? So those are the big pieces, the big changes with the performance measure changes. The key, there's nothing really different other than that it gets scored and that there is an updated list of performance measures that are available. So if you have performance measures from the past, you want to make sure that they're still available. Okay. Overall, if you need a picture, this is how the pieces connect, right? So you have the problem, that's your community needs section, the if, and then the if meaning what you're going to do. And if you have certain resources, the then are the outcomes. That's all part of your logic model, right? To outline how that works, the performance measures, track and monitor the degree to which your prioritized output and outcome are happening. And then the evidence provides that sort of background support, justification, rationale to say that this then will happen because somebody else has done some of this work and showed it there, or we've done it ourselves. Okay. Let's dig in a little bit more. I'm going to take a breath, right? That was a lot, but those are sort of the key takeaways. So if you have to jump off early, I think you've got some of the key things. All right. So in this community section, or in the community needs section for the operational grant, this is pages 28 and 29, I think predominantly page 29 of your NOFO. And again, this part, you all know this. You have, I'm sure most of you have written some sort of application in the past, and there's generally, we all have that sort of can section to talk about, this is the community, these are the characteristics of the community or the area in which we're going to be doing this program, right? And then you have some information about what the severity is, of a particular problem or for whom the problem exists. This is all the kinds of information you want to integrate into the community problem or need section of this application. You'll also summarize it in a column of your logic model, but Millie will talk more about that. So what I have here listed are some key bullets. If you need to think about it as an outline or as a checklist to some extent to make sure that you hit the key information requested by the NOFO, here's what you got. What specifically is the problem? The more specific you can be, the better, because it narrows the focus, right? We know that programs happen within a much larger ecosystem. And sometimes the part that the AmeriCorps members play is a small slice of that. It's an even more narrow piece to something broader. So again, think about for the problem that the AmeriCorps members will be addressing, what is that problem that they're going to be working to alleviate? For whom is it a problem and where does it exist? Note, this should ultimately align, right, with who the AmeriCorps members are going to be intervening with and where they're going to be providing those services. Seriousness, pervasiveness. And these last two bullets are the two biggies that are new, right? So thinking about what role do disparities or inequities play in contributing to the problem. Some of this you may get in other places, right? Like, is it worse for some groups or is it worse for some groups? Has it gotten more or significantly worse for some groups over time? And why is that? Are there other factors at play here? So make sure that you're considering that as you write this section. And then the social vulnerability index. Okay, let's talk about social vulnerability index. So there is a link in the NOFO, and it is, even if you just Google social vulnerability index, you'll find it as well. And what this is a compilation of 4 sort of key areas, right? The first one is socioeconomic status, and that's comprised of poverty, unemployment, income, lack of education as operationalized by no high school diploma. Household composition and disability, minority status and language, housing type, and transportation. Okay. The point of this indicator is to demonstrate that in moments of crisis, those areas that score a higher vulnerability index are more at risk of not being able to respond or cope with that crisis as quickly as others. So in other words, they might need additional supports or additional assistance, and they are at risk, right? So that's this index value. This can speak to some degree to that earlier point about disparities or inequities, but this is definitely something you want to integrate in your needs section. The data are available by county. They are also available all the way down to census tract and community level. So I'm going to quickly come off video because I think my computer is not happy with me today. If I can find where that is. Oh, I'm all frozen. So I'm just going to keep going. Okay. And I'm all delayed. Here we go.
So is the map, is the color like socioeconomic, this is Marie. I just had a quick question, but I could hold it.
Yep. No, go ahead, Marie.
I was looking at the map. Does that map coincide with like the color code that's on the social economics? I think it was like green, and you have a couple green patches in the map. Does that coincide in any way?
No, not necessarily. I think it coincides the colors are more depending on the intensity of the colors, it would be the highest vulnerability.
Okay.
Is that the way it is, Erin?
Yes, so the colors, let's see if I can click out of here for one moment. I'll show you what it actually looks like. The colors are indicative of a range of vulnerability, right? So the darker the color, the more vulnerable based on this indicator that an area is. So here's the actual site, right? This is where you'll go. And let's say we're interested in New Jersey. So you're gonna go here, you're gonna click down. All right, the most recent year that data is available is from 2020, which you see up here. And as it loads, basically what happens is the darker the color, the more vulnerable. And it's based on different threshold levels of low, medium to high, and high. So this is not on my side, so I'm going to save you from the pain of watching this circle, but you'll be able to go ahead and look at this on your own. And we're also happy to go and look at this with you if you need some support afterward. But yes, the darker the color, that is indicative of greater vulnerability. And so in this image, the green is mid, sort of that teal color is mid to high, and then the blue is higher, right? And again, that's based on the compilation of these 4 components. Now, what we wanted to do is give you a little bit of an example of how you might see social vulnerability index in an application. By the way, this is completely an example. I would not use this in terms of the data, right? This is just an example. So in your application, you might use this or a sentence like it to put in here to demonstrate that based on this index, Union County has an overall score of 0.6. However, the city of Elizabeth is at a high risk because some of those census tracts are scoring 0.95 or greater, indicating a high vulnerability level. And in particular, X%, again, don't use this, X% of Elizabeth residents are at 150% of the poverty line and are considered to be low income. So what I want to unpack for you about this is what this demonstrates is, so here's the geographic area that this program is going to be working in. The county is this and is 0.6. But we are working within a particular location in that county that has a higher index value, and there's more vulnerability there. And now I'm going to drill down even more specific to tell you that within that, there is a large proportion of folks in this community that are considered to be low income. And our program wants to serve those individuals in Elizabeth who are low income, right? So this is just an example of how you might integrate the social vulnerability index into your needs statement. Again, as you sort of tailor and think through how this applies to your program and your application, we are more than happy to sit with you and help think through what might work or what might not work for you. Okay, Millie.
Okay, hi. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Millie Benitez. I have the pleasure of working with Erin. at CREEHS, and I'm delighted to share with you information about the logic model. We are going to move pretty quickly to this because most of you are already very familiar with logic models, and we know we need to get to the performance measures, and probably we are going to be spending a little more time there, and also probably on evidence that takes a little longer. So if you have any questions, I'm going to pause at the end, or if you have to stop me at some point, please feel free to do so. So as we all know, I personally love logic models because I love the idea of looking at something, at a diagram, at a picture, and seeing exactly what a program does. And that's basically what logic models want to do. They want to communicate what a program does by putting all the pieces together in just one document. And I think that is the reason why, the application process now is zeroing in on having more of a logic model instead of having, putting everything on the logic model instead of more on the narratives, or not putting everything, but putting emphasis on in applicants having a very good and solid logic model. So it is a requirement attachment to the application. And there is a very specific information that goes in there, as you well know. And as Erin mentioned earlier, now the logic model will have a community summary, a community problem summary. So you will have to, in a very summarized manner, highlight the community problem or need that your program will address. Yes, go ahead, Erin. So we can move to actually see the logic model that, this would be like a template for most of you. We have one at the end that you will be able to use later on to play with. But basically, this is the way it's going to look. You're going to have your summary of the community problem or need. And the summary, as Erin mentioned earlier, you have to make sure that whatever program it is that you had identified, that you have some data to specifically say who is being affected by the problem. And so we will know who would be the beneficiaries of your program. And also, information, any data or statistic that you will have about the problem. And definitely the social vulnerability index, that's something that you will include in your summary. But a lot of the information will be in the body of the application, but you will have to summarize for the logic model that information. So for the resources and inputs, that's basically all the things that will go into delivering the intervention, including but not limited to the location, the site, the context, setting, all those things that would be important or be part of your, that would enable you to deliver the program or the activities. And when we come to the core activities, that's basically your intervention. What is it that those people that need the services will get from the program, from the AC members specifically. And under the activities, it won't be just the activities that that pertain to the direct beneficiaries of the program, but it might be activities that will concern the AC members. Like, for instance, if you are training AC members to be able to conduct the program, that's something that you will also be able to include. But more about that, and you'll be able to see that later on. So outputs is the direct counts. It's just basically the measure of all of the things that your program is doing. So, and that would be something that you will have the opportunity in the output, in your logic model, to say you will select from some performance measures. With more about that later on, but that's something to keep in mind. And for the short-term outcomes, we know that will be the actual change of what will result from your actual intervention, immediately after in the short term. And midterm, that will be expected behaviors that your program will change. So when we talk about short term, we're talking about the knowledge or skills, attitudes, and opinions that you might be able to shape through the program. And then looking at midterm, it would be, hey, as a result of that knowledge, acquired, and these new attitudes, had anything changed about their behaviors that can result in further changes to ultimately change the condition or the status in life for the individual or the community. So this is basically the way the logic model will look. Your plan work would be just the resources and input activities, and your intended results are anything that has to do from the outputs to the long-term outcomes. Next. And again, talking about the problem, and I'm going to try to do this very quickly because we sort of had talked a little bit about this, but it is everything about the problem, what the problem is, for whom, all those things that Erin mentioned earlier. What is the severity of the problem, the pervasiveness, and of course, including the covering of historical inequities. Next. And basically, that would be it for the community problem. Let's talk about the inputs, and that is something that you have to be very clear about. That these are the specific resources that you will be putting into the program, or that the program will need you will need to deliver the program. So again, we're talking about site locations, if there is any training needed for AC members, the context of the program activities, how many members will be needed. Also, if there are any specific characteristics of the members that you will need. Like, for instance, if you need Spanish and bilingual AC members, or if you need members trained in a specific area, all those things you will be able to very succinctly put into your inputs to clarify what the needs are for the program. Next. And so basically, as we said earlier, the inputs are the ingredients or the resources that you need to be able to deliver your activities, and may include, as we said, the training to the members. And there is a question: is there is a minimum number of AmeriCorps volunteers your model needs to have? Well, it will depend. I don't know. I guess the minimum will depend on what you need and the scope of service that you will provide. That will be probably the safe answer at this point. Erin, do you have any opinions about that?
Yeah, I think maybe this might be a commission question, because I think, Barbara, it sounds to me like this question might be related to, is there a requirement from the state or the commission in terms of how many AmeriCorps members a program must have? I think that's what I'm seeing, right?
Okay.
And if that's the case, I think that's a commission question. Okay, yes, all right, so I got that right. So it really is whether or not there is a requirement for a range, like a minimum value of members. So let's hold that question. I'm not sure that Millie and I are the ones who can answer that or should answer that. So let's hold that, and Lisa confirmed. All right, thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so moving on, let's go talk about activities. And so basically the activities are in this section of the logic model. This section is for the core activities that define the intervention of program. So this is basically saying the AmeriCorps members, will be doing this, and they will be doing it many times a week for this number of months. There will be 2 sessions per week. It's going to be more detailed because we need to know how much of the intervention the beneficiaries will receive. So the dosage, number of hours per session, sessions per week, all of that will inform the reader of the scope of your intervention. Also, you will mention the target population for the intervention. It could be third graders that are scoring low in reading. So you will put that information there too. You will include that. And Then another thing is that you have to make sure that the target population for the intervention is aligned with the population you identify in the community problem. So did you said that third graders, or elementary school children in this particular community are performing low in academics, reading, math, whatever, you have to make sure your intervention will be addressing that particular group. Okay, next. Yes, we can go to the next one, Erin. Let's talk about outputs. And, the outputs are basically all the measures of your intervention. So these are basically we are talking about the the measurable outputs resulting from delivering your intervention. So we're talking about the numbers of people served. And this might be if you have two different interventions. Let's say you have an intervention for the elementary school children, you have an intervention for middle school children, you will have to have a count of the individuals that actually have participated, have benefited from that particular intervention. So it's basically the count, it's the number of beneficiaries served. It also includes the type and number of activities conducted. So let's say you had said that you're going to do 10 outreach activities with community members, or 10 educational sessions with older adults or whatever. You have to account for all those activities, and that will be the place that we will say, oh yes, you will account how that that happened. Yes, it happened, and they are counting that it was delivered. So any equity gaps that were closed, that for instance, if now you are providing a service, or there is a service in the community now as a result that people didn't have access to, or people are able to do something that they were not able to do before as a result of your program, that's something that you can count on as an output in this section. And you have to make sure that you prioritize output performance, and you will get that from the performance measure guide. So, and you have to make sure that that you have selected the correct one. So that's why it's very important that you use the most recent performance measure guideline, and more about that later on. So in terms of the outputs, basically it's telling us and telling yourself that, hey, this is the direct product of my activities. It's basically how much. Like, for instance, if your target was, the target was 500, so the 500 that you serve, or if you end up serving 400, whatever the number is, that would be your output. There might be more outputs that you include as your performance measures. So because that's something that we're going to revisit again when we talk about performance measure, but you basically need to have one pairing of one output and one outcome measure that for your intervention in terms of the application process. So the outputs, it is the count, is the amount of service provided, and it could be about people that you serve, products that you created, or any programs that you develop. Next. And the outcomes, yes. Of course, in order to be able to demonstrate meaningful changes, you have to have, a program in place. You have to deliver on the outputs. And so this will be the results of your intervention, like what changes resulting from the program activities implemented. But at the short term, this might be just about knowledge, skills, opinions. At the midterm, that might be about behaviors, things that people are doing different, or things that are happening different as a result of people knowing certain things, of being more aware of certain things. And then the long-term outcomes are the result of all these things that have cumulative make things better for the individual, the community, or a particular condition. Next. And we have already talked a little bit about short-term outcomes. So very quickly, you have to include the number that will demonstrate change. These, and remember, these are changes that will occur soon after the intervention. And this is something that you will be able to sort of report on within the program grant year, within the first year, most likely. And you have to know you prioritize outcome just like you do with the output. And next, midterm, make sure that you also include the target number that will demonstrate change. So it might be that the number in the short-term outcome might be higher than the number in the midterm outcome. So you keep that in mind, that you might have certain expectations based on information that you have, or that something that is realistic for your program to achieve. Next, long-term is basically what has resulted of the whole implementation of the program in the long term. So this change, you might not be able to account for this change within the first year. This is something that would be, you would be able to account for in 2 or 3 years, or perhaps longer. It might be that at the end of the three grant year, you might not be able to measure this, but it's something that you still have to include in your application. Next. Yes, and here is an example that we can go through. We don't have the community issues summarized because, of course, we would not have a space to do it here to be able to show it to you this way. The letters, you know, the font will have to be very small. But anyway, so basically, looking at this logic model, what you're seeing is, hey, the input, these are your project resources, what goes into it. And here we're being very specific about, you know, the number of partner sites that we're working with, the number of AmeriCorps members that we need, and we're specifying that 20 full-time members are needed. The funding that will go into this whole project will be just, you know, federal, state, local funding, research-based nutrition education curricula. That will be the actual program that will be used. And the input also, you have to count the beneficiaries, the people that will be the recipients of the program, low-income students and families at high risk. And so the activities, those are your core project components, you know, and it's just telling, you know, the reader what the program will do. Specifically, it says if you have 5 partner sites, and you have members and all of that, the members will receive the 20 hours of training. Members will recruit and plan to deliver curricula at 5 partner sites located in the city, whatever your city is. So you have to specify the location. That's very important. If you have different sites in the same city, municipality, you will just list the locations. Specify that the members will deliver the nutritional curricula. And again, you have to be very specific about the dosage, duration, you know, because that's the way that the reader will know how much of the program the beneficiaries will receive from the AC members. So in terms of the outputs, again, this is count. So you can see here, you know, so you were training 20 members. So yes, 20 members received training in nutritional education curricula. 50 students, you know, ages 8 to 12 complete the nutrition education program. And 50 education events held measured by event signings. So all those things, we will discuss more this later when we talk about performance measures. 500 individuals served at education events, you know. So this would be the way you present your outputs, and you know, that would be the count that you will have to track. So in terms of short-term outcomes, of the 50 individual students that you will be serving, in this particular case, 35 students will have increased knowledge of healthy eating. That's, I guess, being realistic, thinking, well, you know, of course, we would like to affect everyone, making sure that 100% of the population we serve, achieve the outcome, but being realistic, let's say 35 too. There is the outcome have been identified here from the Healthy Futures, age 17. And we are saying that out of the 500 individuals that we will be serving with education events, 400 will have increased knowledge of healthy food resource management skills. When we move to the medium-term outcomes, we see that the numbers start shrinking a little bit. That is because this is about changing behaviors. We know that it's kind of easier for people to say, yes, I learned about this. Yes, I feel different about this. But when it comes to actual change of behavior, it might take people longer. So it's realistic to consider that, yes, the numbers might be smaller for the students that have been going to the program on a regular basis, and also for those individuals that had attended those educational events. We go to the long-term outcomes, you see the numbers getting smaller, and because this is a very specific population being served, a small group of people, we know that at the end, at least 15 students will report improved BMI. And that's a measure in this case. So because this was an obesity program, if people had adjusted their eating habits and they're taking better care of themselves, we hope to see a change. And in this case, for this particular program, they had decided that the measure of long-term, for the long-term outcome, the measure of change would be improved BMI. So, which seems pretty realistic. So, okay. Any questions about this? So let's go.
I did want to jump in one quick
please.
moment, and I think just to sort of highlight something here, which is many of you have an existing logic model for your program, if it's in print or if it's in your head, or you've used it in an application. I think what Millie just walked you through is sort of how you translate that logic model in whatever format that is into the requirements of the NOFO. And I think I wanted to highlight that because sometimes in this particular NOFO, there are requirements for the logic model component that you may not typically put in your logic model, or that you might not include in logic models that you have for other purposes, right? Some of the details of those requirements from the NOFO, we tried to translate into that example. So that, I think, is, just to sort of bring this together to say what Millie just walked you through is sort of an attempt to translate those requirements into something very practical. So as you're reviewing your own logic model, make sure that you're hitting all of those requirements in terms of the dosage and duration, integrating the targets for those outputs and outcomes for which you have targets set for.
Great point. Thank you, Erin. And so these are, we have these best practices that we want to share with you. Eventually, you will receive a copy of this presentation. But as we walk you through the logic model analysis, just make sure that all those elements, that the NOFO is requiring are incorporated into your logic model. Make sure you include the number of sites, the number of members, locations, explain the characteristics of the skill, our skills that the AC members need to be able to deliver the program. Include information about context. Another good thing is to use BERS, action-oriented language, to describe the activities. Include the doses and duration. That's very important because that's going to let the reader know, again, about how much of an intervention or a program people will be receiving. Next. Make sure that you correctly categorize outputs and outcomes. Make sure that you select the correct ones from the performance measure guide. And that's very important. Include the actual numbers, for the outputs and outcomes. Make sure and that make sure the targets are realistic. Must prioritize outputs and outcomes to performance measures module. That's very important. And also organized roles of the logic model to clearly connect activities to expected outputs and outcomes. You know, as you saw in the example earlier, everything was lined up. Yeah, so it goes from for the students that were going through the program, there was the outcomes, you know, line up for them, as were the outcomes line up for the other categories. For instance, for the educational components, you know, the educational sessions. So just make sure that everything is lined up. So for ease of reading and for people to be able to make the connections that this belongs here and there. And you have about 8 pages, you know, to express your logic model. So make sure you use them if you need to. You might not need to hold the whole thing, and that's okay. But you have a maximum of 8 pages. Next. And probably before we go into performance measure, we should check if there are any questions. I guess no. Great. So I know that some of you said that you wanted to sort of learn a little bit more about performance measures, and basically this is all about the ongoing monitoring and reporting of your program accomplishments. This is something that it's going to be ongoing because you will have to be reporting on the performance measures quarterly. And this might be not necessarily on the outcome part, but probably at least on the outputs you will be reporting ongoingly. So this is just measuring your progress throughout the grant period. These are identified after you specify your outputs and outcomes. And this is an iterative process to identify measures that align with outputs and outcomes. You may need to revise your outputs and outcomes to better fit with what is measurable. This is we try to sort of let you know here that you have to really use that guide, the performance measure guide, to make sure that everything is lined up. So in terms of the AmeriCorps performance measures rules, make sure that you go visit this, and I don't know if you want to click on that, Erin, to sort of visit. Probably most of you are familiar with this. This is the 2024 performance measure instruction for state and national. And here you'll find all the categories. There are specific categories that you will search for depending on the area, depending on your community problem and your intervention. So let's say that for that particular one, the healthy futures of the example, so because it was an educational program for nutritional education for students, that's where you could find the output and the outcome pairing for that particular intervention. So so here we sort of wanted to show you specifically here how you go in this particular case. The output, it was correctly selected. And that's something that the reader, when they read your application, they will be looking at that. They will be looking at, oh, yes, this makes sense. This is correct. You know, they selected the correct output. They selected the correct outcome. So that's where you go to select your outcome pairing. And as you can see to the right under intervention, it was correctly selected under education and training. So for the next thing is to define some of the key terms. Yeah. So for instance, here in this particular section of the guide, you will find what it means by individuals, individual served, those recipients, direct recipients of the program. That's basically it. Those people that actually went to your program and that you were able to track. And this means some particular engagement, and you will have to determine how much of a program the person will receive, or what will be considered actual engagement in the program. So you will have to have a tracking mechanism that will ensure unduplicated count of individuals. And when it comes to the outcome, so you will report, you will select the outcome, and you will have to explain how you will measure the outcome. And this might be by, a pre-post survey, it might be a test, it might be some instrument, that is already have been developed. Let's say if you are doing an academic performance piece and it's something that you've been doing in school, it might be that you are going to be measuring that through the academic measures that the school you're working with will contribute as baselines and also post-program. So you have to be very clear about what those measures will be, how this particular outcome will be measured. Next. Well, performance measure, they don't measure everything that that you do with the program, but because the program will be doing different things. But at a minimum, you have to prioritize an output and outcome pairing. So it's very important that the output and outcome pairing that you choose is very reflective of the effort of your program and the direct result of, if you are doing this intervention, you know that you will get this number of people will benefit, and this will be the result of your intervention. So you have to be very clear about that.
Just to reiterate before we move on, so one of the things that I think can be tricky about this application is the distinction between the more universal broad-based list of outputs and outcomes that you might reference in your narrative and include in your logic model, and then sort of the short list, the prioritized list of outputs and outcomes that you use for your measures. So just to reiterate, because I think this is really important, your program is more than just your performance measures, right? Your program has outcomes and outputs that are broader and bigger than just those. The role that your output and outcome performance measures play, however, is to shine a spotlight, to focus on a key set, right, an output and an outcome that you think is core and fundamental to the primary purpose of your program, right? This is where there is no need to measure 10 performance measures. There is no need to measure, even 6 in some cases, though, depending upon your program, maybe that does fit, right? But ultimately, your performance measures are the key things that you will be held responsible for, A, achieving the target, and B, reporting and collecting data on during your period of the award. So you will have more outputs and outcomes that you reference in your narrative and your logic model, and you will have at least one output and one outcome that you prioritize for your performance measures.
Thank you, Erin. That was great. Okay, so here let's get into a little more detail about this, because this will be what you're seeing here to the right. Is you can actually, it's kind of hard to read, but it's just giving you sort of an insight into the eGrants data collection. eGrants, something that the eGrants application, something that that Lisa mentioned earlier. So so this in the eGrants application, when you go in, you will have to enter information about the performance measures. You will have to describe the intervention activities, and in that first entry there that you see, it's kind of hard to see, but there is a brief description of the intervention. you know, so you will do that when you go to eGrants to enter this information. And you will select the method, you know, for data collection. And in this case, is a tracking system. So that you select the method, and specifically, you will have to describe what the system is. In this case, it says it's a signing system for each nutrition education session that captures participants' first and last name. So be very clear about this, you know, of how you're going to track participation. You know, in this case, we're talking about outputs, number of individuals participating will be tracked by the signing system at each of the sessions, capturing, you know, the individuals that participate. Then the data will be transferred to Excel to track each individual participant throughout the program. So they could say at the end the number of times the individual attended sessions. So, and also you can see here very small the target. You will have to enter the target number. So if you are planning, in this case, it was 150, whatever number of individuals you plan to serve with the program. So in terms of entering performance measures, the description box, let's go through these things. This is very important and something that we can review later on too. I know that this might seem like a lot at this point, but just make sure that, again, you know, looking back when we mentioned defining the key terms of the measure, you know, that's something that is important that you do. You have to define improvement. So if you say 35 students will improve, you know, in this area, you will have to say or explain, you know, what improvement means. Explain what the instrument will measure, you know, so if the instrument will measure a knowledge of healthy eating, of physical activity, whatever, you will put the construct, you will specify what the instrument will measure. And of course, include the timing, you know, when will this happen? So if you're going to be conducting a survey at the beginning of the program and a survey at the end of the program, pre-post survey, if you're going to be collecting data from this school data to inform, you know, specific outcomes, if you're doing an academic program, you will have to enter, you know, when, you know, the data will be, you know, available, baseline data and post data, and when. Provide any information about reliability and validity of the instrument if available. So it might be if you are implementing curricula that comes already with an instrument and you're going to be using that instrument, most likely there will be information on reliability and validity on the instrument. So you will be able to include that information. And you know, when you talk about the outcomes, make sure that you consider the improvement, how much of an improvement you expect to see, you know, how much change do you expect to see? And then how data will be calculated to determine change. That's very important. And because you need to have a clear way of knowing, you know, and you have to let the reader know that, yeah, there is a plan for that. Explain how the target was set. And this could be, if you have been conducting this program for the same program for a while, you might have past performance data that you can rely on. And if you are new, it's a new program, you can rely on the evidence. And we'll be talking about evidence in a little bit. You'll be able to describe, you know, in the evidence section, you know, or use the evidence to describe, you know, why you are planning to, you think that would be a good target. So next. So in terms of best practices, as Eric mentioned, make sure you prioritize the output and outcomes that represent significant program activities, and then select the performance measure. Make sure you use the current performance measure guide. Set the performance measure targets as numbers, not percent. Make sure you're realistic, but ambitious at the same time, which is kind of tricky. So make sure that you're well informed when making that decision. Explain how and why you selected the target you did. Define all the performance measure key terms, improve, capacity build. If it's about improvement or capacity building, what does that mean? And if appropriate, develop clear, specific, and measurable applicant-determined performance measures that are not duplicated in the 2024 performance measure. We didn't talk about this earlier, but this is something that if you see, you look at your program, you go to the performance measure guide, and you don't see a performance measure that matches exactly what your program will be doing, you could actually develop and create your a performance measure, but you have to make sure that it's very clear, specific, and that is measurable. And you might probably want to run that by your program officer or the person that you're working with at the state office. Do you need, Erin, do you want to add anything to that piece?
Yeah, I think I would just highlight, and I know we had some folks say that this data piece and performance measures is an area of interest for them. And I think one of the tricky parts about performance measures is it is very tailored and specific to your program. And so the first part is really the conceptualizing of it. And I think for many of you, you've already been there, you've traveled that journey already, and you know sort of what you've prioritized for your measures, right? You have an opportunity at this application phase to think about if those still fit, if your program has evolved. And if they don't fit, if that's not really the key outcome of your program, or if what's available in the manual is not really a good tight match to what you're doing, you do have this option then to write your own measure that is more, we use the word aligned, but is a better match, is a better fit for what you really see. You also have the ability within these measures to define them as you need. The measures are pretty high level, so you can define health knowledge. You can define served in whatever way that makes sense for your program. So that's why Millie made the point of if it's not, duplicated in the manual, you can do an applicant determined. Sometimes there's ways to define terms to make it work for you. And sometimes you really do need your own measure. And that really then is linked with the outcomes that you're planning for your program and perhaps some of the evidence that you've already found about your program. And when you design your applicant determined measure, you want to make sure that it is measurable, right? Seems sort of circular, but in the reality, you want it to look and feel a little bit like the other ones in the manual in terms of the number of something, right? The number of people who've demonstrated improvement in something, or the number of acres that you did some sort of lasting improvement to if you're in environmental stewardship, right? So I think I would just be really thoughtful about this section of selecting your performance measures. And then the next part, the next phase of that thoughtfulness goes into, okay, what are the nuts and bolts of how you get those data? And the performance measure attachment asks you to really think through that and plan that out. And the reason being is you've got to jump right in, right, as soon as that funding comes in. And so that planning process is also very unique to your program and to the sites where your members will be serving and to your beneficiaries. So unfortunately, we don't have sort of a unilateral set of recommendations or guides to say, here's how you collect data in every situation, right? Because it really depends. But I would recommend really thinking through every piece of that data collection process, everything from how you get people's names on a checklist to how you make sure you're tracking when they show up to something, to what are the specific questions you might ask on a survey, and where do you put those surveys after that, and for each of those questions, how are you going to measure or assess if something changes from pre to post, right? Those are all of those itty bitty detailed questions you want to sort of walk yourself through and be able to have some idea of how you would answer them. And then that gets translated into that performance measure attachment.
Great, thank you. And talking about that, about measuring your efforts, you have to make sure, as Erin said, you have to be very thoughtful about, planning on how to measure, your performance throughout. But very important is to make sure you explain the instrument that you will be using and how it will be used. Select instrument that will accurately measure what is supposed to, what you want them to measure. And I think that it is very, it's highly recommended that you use pre and post instrument when possible to assess change over time. Plan how, when, where, and who will collect the data. You need to know ahead of time or have a plan on how the data will be collected, who will be doing, when will that happen. And so in the end, as Erin and we have been mentioning throughout, the important thing is that you have a good pairing of output and outcome measurement that you can really devote your efforts to make sure that you get meaningful data. So less is more for the number of performance measures you select. We're going to leave you with that. And also we want to refer you to the some attachments that are part of the, that you will find specific instructions. So for instance, attachment A, from the performance measuring instructions, you have a checklist there too, in Appendix B. So make sure that you check all these resources. And at the end also, we're going to share some resources with you, but always please go back to all this information available to you as you are thinking and planning. And also, of course, you have us to provide information if you need to think through something. So thank you, and let's do it.
Okay. All right, let's talk about evidence, right? We've been referencing it. Let's get there. So now your application, you've established what the community problem need is, right? You've tailored that sort of section to the AmeriCorps requirements. In the narrative, you've described sort of the nuts and bolts of what you need for your program, where you're going to be serving, who's going to benefit from the member services and what specifically those members are going to be providing. And you're going to outline some of the changes that you expect to see in the beneficiaries as a result of the member services, right? You've got this logic model that really clearly meets all the requirements and very cohesively sort of follows the bouncing ball, right? These ingredients, these activities, these are our outputs, these are our outcomes. You've done the work of prioritizing of all of those outputs and outcomes of your program. These are the key ones that we've now prioritized for our performance measures. You've done the work to think through how you're actually going to collect those data, and you've written out that plan in the performance measure section. Now we get to the evidence component of the application. This is worth about 12 points. And this is, by and large, the place where you say, this is the backup for why this is a safe investment for AmeriCorps. Other people have said that if you do this, this will happen, or I've already established from past performance, or I've funded an evaluation, and I know that when we do X, Y happens. And Y is the outcome I already told you we were going after, and it's in my logic model, and maybe it's even a performance measure, right? So how does this section get scored, and what specific information should you include, right? You're gonna highlight evidence from studies. When we say studies here, we're really talking about some peer-reviewed literature like journal articles, but it could also be evaluation reports. It could be your own evaluation reports. It could be something of a program in another state that somebody else wrote about. Any of those would work. Evidence is two parts. There's a tier and a quality. The tier tells us how rigorous is this evidence, right? Like, Did we do sort of the gold standard assessment where we know that changes happen because of the program, or have we gathered some information from other programs that have assessed their own outcomes and they see some change in the right direction, right? There's a continuum of that. And that's why you have different tiers from pre-preliminary all the way to strong. Quality is how good those data are, right? We talk about evidence quality, but some of these studies might be better in quality than others, right? Depending on the research design or depending upon how recent it was or who did it, right? There's some variation in the quality. So that's why the scoring is in two parts. Basically, what I want to walk you through here is if you have never done this program before and you are designing a program from scratch, you are likely going to be at a pre-preliminary evidence tier. And what that means is that you don't have evidence from this particular program. The specific activities that you're going to implement, they have not been, there hasn't been a research study about it. There hasn't been an evaluation study. You're at pre-preliminary, right? And you're going to bring in evidence from interventions like it, but it's not exactly the same. This is where performance measure data come into play. You might have some of that from other grants or other programs. We move to preliminary, right? And preliminary is generally when you have had a program and it has been implemented for several years, and you are using data from that specific program to justify that the outcomes you said were going to happen for this program are indeed happening, right? So this is preliminary data, and you need to have some sort of evaluation of that intervention or some sort of research. Now, there's a continuum of what that thing could look like. It could be a memo of findings, right, where you analyze or you sort of summarize your performance measure data over the years and the degree to which you've met your targets. You might also work with an evaluator, or if you have a person internal to your organization that handles measurement and evaluation, they might look at your data and say, oh yeah, you did indeed, increase knowledge about health-related topics based on this intervention, right? They might look at your data. And when I say look at your data, they might compare your pre and your post in a way beyond when you report for your performance measures. Moderate and strong have a different flavor to them. Moderate and strong evidence tiers mean that someone else has been evaluating your program. So someone external to your organization has designed some sort of research study to better understand if the changes happening as part of your program are indeed part of your program. These are more rigorous, AKA expensive, and also take more time often, right? These levels of evidence typically occur with programs that have been in play for a while and have a very stable implementation structure, meaning that you're not making changes, it's implemented the same way all the time. And in general, this is where you go beyond just your performance measure data, right? There might be some additional data that's collected and more sophisticated analyses that happen. Okay, so for those of you who are in the pre-preliminary state, when you actually write in your application, you're going to talk about the fact that you have evidence at the pre-preliminary level, and then you're going to go ahead and you're going to summarize up to about 2 or so studies that you've pulled from either the AmeriCorps Evidence Exchange or your own searches or your own networks, and you're going to summarize those studies to say, I found a study about XYZ program. You're going to describe that program to some degree, demonstrate how it's similar to your program that you're proposing. You're going to talk about what the methods were to conduct this research or evaluation, and talk about what the outcomes were that were found as part of that study. And then you're going to tie that into a bow to say, and this is why this matters to my program, right? So it might be something like, this particular health education session was implemented, fewer or more frequently than we're proposing, and you would provide the specifics. A pre and post survey of child participants found that students significantly increased their knowledge about how to read a nutrition label at the end of the program. As a result, we believe that since we are implementing a very similar intervention, but perhaps less frequently, we expect that we also will see a significant change in students' knowledge in reading a nutrition label. However, we don't think it will be 80%, we think it will be 60%, right? So you're going to sort of link it to your program. All right. New. For applicants that have been funded 6 or more consecutive years, it is expected that you're coming in at a preliminary or greater level. Now, if you don't have it at this point, right? If you don't have the evidence at this point, my guess is it might be pretty tricky to get it in the next 4 weeks. So what happens, right? If you are one of these programs and you do not have greater than pre-preliminary evidence, which we'll talk about in a minute, in your application, our recommendation is that you state why that's the case. You state why there is evidence and what you do have at the pre-preliminary level, and then explain your plan to build evidence over the next year plus. Okay? So if you are in preliminary, right, you're going to state you're in that particular tier, and you're going to describe the evidence from the study. And here again, you're going to explain the intervention, right? And the key when you explain the intervention is you need to clearly demonstrate how it is exactly the same as the intervention you are proposing. Any variation or changes from the intervention that you're proposing, it's no longer considered the same intervention, and you drop down to pre-preliminary. Okay, but assuming this intervention is the exact same, like let's say you're just replicating your program design for the next 3 years and you're going to implement the same program, you can use your performance measure data. And so you would talk about this intervention that we've implemented for the last 3 years, did all of the same things with all of the same people as we're proposing. And we've collected performance measure data by conducting pre and post surveys of our participants at the end of each educational workshop. An analysis of these data where we compared scores pre to post indicated a significant increase in the mean scores of people's knowledge about reading nutrition labels. And as a result, we have evidence to support that this outcome of increasing health knowledge is supported by our past performance, right? That could be an example of how you would write that up at the preliminary level. And then again, it sort of builds over time for moderate or strong. Now, in this case, if you are at preliminary, moderate, or strong evidence, you want to submit 1 or 2 of those evaluation reports, right? So you need to have some sort of report to go with it. It's not just sufficient to have your summary. You got to have that report as well. Again, this just highlights the 5 key characteristics that have to be the same between the program you're proposing and the program you're describing in the evidence. This only applies at the preliminary or more rigorous level. Okay, I'm going to keep moving through here, but you'll have these slides. These are examples of descriptions at the various levels of evidence, right? And so it'll give you a flavor of how evidence gets more rigorous with the tier and how you might describe that and what you would submit with it. This is just sort of a handy dandy tool to say what evidence you are, what evidence tier you are, what you would have to submit, and how to make sure you're in that place, right? What would be the study design? What would be the entity conducting that evaluation? Lastly, for evidence quality, these are some key questions that we suggest you ask yourself as you're writing those sections, right? So if you're at the pre-preliminary tier, you want to make sure that you have relevant evidence. Now, this evidence is not describing how your intervention was developed. It's not describing why this is a problem. It is not describing or defining a concept. The relevant evidence here is evidence that says, when you do X, Y happens, right? This is a different kind of evidence that you want to use than that sort of gives you surveillance. So at the pre-preliminary tier, you want to make sure that you're providing relevant evidence, that your studies are done within the last 6 years. So newsflash to me, that was 2018, right? So studies from 2015 or 2014 are no longer considered recent by this standard. You want to make sure that those studies demonstrate a meaningful positive effect, right? So if your outcome is to increase health knowledge and the study shows that knowledge wasn't increased, well, then that's not demonstrating that effect, right? So you don't want to use that study. And you want to provide who conducted the study. At the next level, preliminary, moderate, or strong, you're doing all of those things, plus you're demonstrating how the intervention is the same in the evidence to what you're proposing. How those studies were designed, right? Give us a sense of the rigor of that, how data were collected. All right, best practices. Don't forget to summarize your evidence. You're attaching those study designs, but you want to demonstrate in a couple of paragraphs how this evidence was collected so that the reviewers can make an assessment on rigor and robustness. And then you also want to be able to demonstrate how the intervention is similar or the same to what you're proposing, and that the outcomes that were measured in that study are similar to the ones that you are proposing. Okay, make sure your evidence is from the last 6 years. And here's the thing. If you've got past performance measure data, use it. It's there for a reason. You've been reporting it over the years. Now it's time to look at it holistically and put it back into the application to demonstrate your performance. Okay, so in this slide deck, we're providing you with some links to some key documents, including what you already have in terms of the NOFO and additional attachments and links that are included in that. We're going to share with you some checklists and templates that we suggest might be helpful as you develop this application to make sure that you're hitting those key requirements that are from the NOFO, right? And then your last resource that we'll leave you with is our contact information. As you are developing this application and you're, let's say, trying to plan out that data collection and you need some support, we are here for you, right? And what this means is you email us and you say, hey, I don't even know what question to ask. I just need some help. And we jump on a phone call and we talk through that. Or if you say, I'm struggling trying to pick out what the right performance measure is, or I'm struggling trying to figure out what my target should be, or I'm not sure I really know if this is the right way to summarize my evidence, can you help? We're here to help you with that. Our goal is to help you write the most competitive application as possible, because that ultimately benefits all of us, right? So that's how you contact us. This slide deck will be sent to the state this afternoon, so you should have this relatively quickly. And I am 2 minutes over. I'm sorry. But Yvette, we did have a quick question just to shoot over to you, which was, is there a minimum number of AmeriCorps members that applicants should be planning for?
I think, hello, hi, everyone. Sorry, I didn't see the beginning of the presentation, but I'm here now to answer those questions. So there is not a minimum number of AmeriCorps members. There is a minimum number of MSYs, which is full-time equivalents. So at a minimum, if you're looking at full-time slots, okay, you will have at least 8 AmeriCorps members. If you're looking at more, other types of slots, you're going to have more. Because, for instance, if you're looking at half-time members, there's 2 members for every 1 MSY, so 1 FTE. So, so that's how that works. So definitely 8 full-time is the least amount. But if you have smaller slot types, you're going to have more AmeriCorps members. Okay. They should equal that 8 FTEs though. Okay, so if you're using only half-time members, just make sure that, for instance, that you have 16 half-time members, which equals that minimum amount of 8 MSYs. Okay.
I just wanted to point out this question came from, I believe, Barbara Prince. Yeah, Barbara. And you would be a new planning grant because and planning grants are not operational, and you wouldn't have members. This would be something to
Correct.
think about in
So,
the future.
yeah. So this question would relate more to operating grants or people who or current planning grants who we've been working with since last September, or recompeting operating programs. So, if you are considering applying for a new planning grant, then you won't be writing in any information for members at this point. You're just going to be working, to plan the infrastructure, plan and, develop your plan, your timeline for when you would then be submitting for an operating grant later on in the planning process. Okay. If you're not sure about this, you definitely, if you did not attend the first planning grant session, you really need to look at that, because that's going to give you all the ins and outs of what you can or cannot do under a planning grant. Okay, so
No,
you know,
we did participate in that.
okay,
But in the planning, we needed to know
yeah,
for the subsequent year, should we be funded?
yes, yeah, because
What
in
was
the right,
the minimum size of the project?
yes. Yeah, so yeah, you would have to have, again, depending on the slot types that you're planning for. And if you're applying for a planning grant, you're going to be changing throughout that planning process, because what you initially think, all right, you're going to be applying for may change throughout. Once you start working with CREEHS, once you start working with whoever's on our staff that's going to be managing planning grants or working with them, you may find, that, oh my God, we thought we were going to do all full-time. Now I'm thinking maybe to bring some full-time and maybe some half-time members. Or if I'm working with a college, a group of college students that I plan to bring on students, you may decide that you want quarter time or you want 300-hour members, because they're going to be also going to school, they're going to be having classes, and what is feasible in terms of the time commitment that they can give to AmeriCorps. So a lot of considerations when you think about the size of your cadre of your program. But in writing your planning grant, what we're more interested in is, what is your vision for those AmeriCorps members? How will they add value to the problem that will be addressed, that they'll be addressing in the community? And you're going to give an idea of how many you're envisioning. But again, just be open to the fact that during that planning process, you may be changing that. Okay. I don't know, Erin, if you had, you kind of were nodding, if you had anything that you might think.
No, I was very much nodding at the idea of shifting the idea over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would imagine that some of the current planning grantees on this call might agree with that.
Yeah, I've seen it with the current planning grants that we have, that they were originally envisioning something different, and then, kind of like in the whole planning process, developing that infrastructure, developing that logic model, really researching the evidence and looking at what works, what doesn't work, that they actually thought, and learning more about AmeriCorps in general. AmeriCorps in general is, you are managing, a sizable group of individuals who are out there doing service. And these are people with, their own lives. They have, sometimes, it's a time commitment on the part of your program to sit with them, to review the, what they've accomplished, making meaning out of that. Because it's not just mentoring a student. What are you actually achieving here? You may be mentoring a student, but when you see that aha moment when a student is learning something, that's, you're helping facilitate, a reflection session with those members. You're trying to make meaning of the importance of their contributions. So all of those things take time with the program. It's not just deploying members out there. You're also working with a group of individuals who are taking away something very valuable in their life, and you're helping them to recognize that. So those are some of the things you want to think about when you do a planning grant also. Okay. Any other questions? Well, you can always reach out to us. And, you know, if you want to have more conversation about, you know, the application process, please let us know. Questions will be posted. FAQs will be posted on their website moving forward. So you can always access those FAQs also.
Yeah, I hope to have it posted this session, as well as the lovely deck that I know they're sending over. Hope to have posted to our website by Monday or Tuesday of next week, and I'll send out an email just to let you know that it's there and it's available.
And also the link, the direct link to the application.
Okay, yeah, I'll be sending out that email with the
Thank you.
instructions on how to create the link, how to create an application. There's no real direct link. It's egrants.gov, and from there you have to create the application. But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, we were having a little glitch last week with it, opening up the primes, but that got resolved. So you're able to go ahead and start creating those applications. I recommend, again, putting your narrative documents on Word and your budget on Excel, and then kind of transferring things over. E-grants will time out eventually, so just keep saving things as you go through e-grants. Yeah, just save. And again, if you experience, you know, some, you know, apprehension about e-grants or some difficulties with it, you can reach out to the help desk. And if it's something that is going to require more time, you can reach out to us. If it's something simple and it's something that doesn't have to go to a developer, we can probably, you know, assist with that as well. Okay. So send us emails. We respond really well to emails, not as much calls, because sometimes we're in meetings and those kinds of things. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for your time. And I want to thank CREEHS. Millie and Aaron always do a fabulous job for us. We've been working with them for years. And I think the quality of our applications always gets better and better. You know, they're a great resource to you. Please follow up with them. If you have questions, if you're not sure, please, you know, reach out to them. They're there to help. Okay. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.